Hello, I'm John Grom, and this is the Right and Left Discussion Forum. Right and Left is a nonprofit corporation committed to the promotion of civil discourse in politics. Our sole purpose is to urge voters to be a more insistent voice in the political process by demanding respectful dialogue and a commitment to finding common ground. Today, our panel will try to find common ground in a discussion on the positive and negative aspects of term limits. Since the founding of our republic, Americans have been skeptical of a concentration of power in too few hands, which is why our founders envisioned a citizens' legislature to retain control of the government by the people. Only since the early 20th century have we ignored this legacy and have begun to accept lifelong career office holders. Term limits are seen as one way to return to the citizen legislature vision of our founders. Our panelists today, beginning on my left, are Dr. Ronald Chamberlin. Ron is a retired research chemist and a student of just about everything. On his left is Jerry Ritzman. Jerry is vice president and partner of Ritzman Pharmacies, as well as an active community pharmacist and a journeyman rib cooker. On his left is Patty Haskins. Patty is a retired math teacher from our high school here in Wadsworth, and one of only 2 Democrats on the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Bryan Laubaugh. Bryan is president of R&B Financial Consultants and a member of the Medina County Republican Executive Committee. As has become our custom, I would like to begin our discussion with Ron Chamberlin. Ron, we have term limits on the president and in some state legislatures in this country, but not on the U.S. Congress. Do you think that term limits on the U.S. Congress would help us return to the vision of the citizen legislature and provide for a broader distribution of power? Or have we come too far for that?
John, it's hard for me, I think, to pick a strong stand on term limits because there are several handles on that coffee pot. Mm-hmm. For example, if you have the term limits, this rather ties down, this gives some freedom, I think, of legislators, because when they come at the end of their term limits, then they're perhaps a little more free to be a little bit more creative in what they're doing. On the other hand, it could be a frustrating thing, I think, for them. I liken it somewhat analogous to the concept of tenure in teachers, if I may, Patty. If you have a teacher with tenure, that teacher can be free to experiment, to be creative, to carry out programs that are perhaps a little bit out of the mainstream that might be effective. On the other hand, if you get a really bad one in there, it's kind of hard to get them out. So without term limits, for every Ralph regular, you might have a Jesse Helms. Personal opinion.
Oh, no political opinion there, Ron.
No political opinion.
Jerry, what's your take?
Well, I think we already have a method for term limits, and in the Congress it's every 2 years. And I see what happens in the state of Ohio with term limits, where people are jumping from the House to the Senate. I don't know, where is Bill Batchelder now? Is he in the House or the Senate? I don't know. He keeps jumping around, and I think it is to some extent a disservice to the constituents to have term limits, because how long does it take a new member of the legislature to really understand the political process and the issues that they're dealing with, to learn about not only their constituents as individuals, but their constituencies who have different businesses, different professions that they're in, and how the legislature affects them. So I think I have questions about the value of term limits, and would really want to examine that to continue it. I'd be in favor of eliminating them because the learning curve. That's what I'm thinking.
Patty, you've been thinking about this. I know you
Yes.
have.
I can see positives and negatives on both sides. I mean, I have read that there are those that feel that unless we have term limits, there's a disadvantage to incumbents that are running for office. I read a figure where I think it was between 1952 and 2000, over 90% of incumbent members of the House of Representatives were reelected, which is, interesting. And the idea there is that this would discourage very bright people that want to run for office because they say, hey, how can I win against this incumbent? On the other hand, this is a democracy where why shouldn't the people of the United States or of a community like Wadsworth be able to vote for the person they want? And if there's someone that they want in that office for 50 years, let them. And I agree with Jerry. There is a learning curve. Being in office right now, it does take a while just to get to know the office. Also, if you have a project that you'd like to see through, it's going to take a few years to do that. And the other thing that hasn't been brought up is you have to consider whether the term limits are going to be, are they for consecutive office or lifetime term limits? Ohio, I believe, has it set up, it has term limits, but you stay in office so long, then you sit out for 2 years and then you can come back again. So you can still make a lifetime career out of that. So I think those are all points that we have to consider when looking at term limits.
Bryan, have you given this any thought?
Well, term limits, I would agree with the overall discussion in that we do have a mechanism, and that is the election. After 2 years or 4 years, that person has to stand for re-election. And if they've done a good job, then they deserve to be re-elected. And once again, the other handle to that coffee pot is, what if you do get someone that really isn't that good, and they've used their office to create a situation where you're never going to get them out? I think, when you look at the President of the United States, we have a term limit there. He can run for 2 terms, and it's lifetime. That's it, 8 years. But on a local level, I think the citizens really need the opportunity to vote those people out and not be constrained. I agree with the learning curve. You take a freshman senator or a freshman congressman, and I think for the first year, they really spend a lot of time just figuring out where they're at and where their office is located in the staff and how they deploy those people. And when you get to an individual like a Ralph Regula who understood the system and did a lot of benefit for our congressional district. So I'm a little opposed to term limiting the folks that are more locally based. But I think as the farther you get away, the President of the United States, the Vice Presidents, those types of positions that can really create some power, we really need to look at that and address it. And I don't see it hurting the system.
Yeah.
If I think about it, if we had term limits, and I'm dating myself here, where would we ever have had a Mike Mansfield? Would we ever have had an Everett Dirksen? Would we ever have a Senator Byrd? We wouldn't have had those folks.
Are you arguing for or against term limits when you mention those names?
I'm just saying we probably wouldn't have had those folks, and I can't say because a couple of those names are from when I was quite a while ago.
Yes.
So that was quite a while ago, but they were influential people that you read about and probably had a big influence. I wonder if we had term limits, what would be the possibility of lengthening the term? If you would have term limits for the U.S. Congress of, let's say, 3-4 year terms, so we wouldn't be running an election 2.5 or 1.5 years
That's
out of
part
every
of the
2.
problem. You run an election every 2 years.
And so if you would say Senate term limits, you might lengthen that term to, they're 6 years
6
now.
years now.
I don't know if you'd do it there, but there seems to be more stability in a longer term, and you wouldn't be campaigning all the time.
I guess in my mind, I have a picture of a rural district that has been gerrymandered into a very, very safe position where it's all going to be one party, and you've got a very small handful of people controlling the party, and the same guy gets nominated year after year after year. And the seniority rules in Congress mean that he gets to have his choice of committees, committee chairmanships, and he gets to be a very powerful guy. Think Wayne Hayes. There's a name for you.
I was about to make the same point, really, with the present state of the heavily gerrymandered districts. It's not maybe so easy to re-elect or to elect a new person into that thing. I think you're exactly right, John. I have a worry about that as well.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of a small handful of people in a rural area wielding a tremendous amount of power, I mean, particularly when somebody gets to be the chairman of House Ways and Means or the Defense or something like that, that would be worrisome.
But is that corrected by term limits or by changing the gerrymandering rule?
Either that or changing the seniority rules. I don't think there's anything in the law that says that the seniority is the driving factor behind committee appointments and chairmanships.
I expect that's a law for itself, right there.
Well, it puts me in mind of something else that I'll bring up a little bit later. However, I did want to throw this in. I don't know if you're aware, there's a congressman from New York who entered a House resolution. It's called a joint resolution, HJR, a House joint resolution, calling for repeal of the 22nd Amendment, which is what gives the term limits to the president.
I just saw that.
And I think it's because he wants Bush to come back. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm thinking when they were put in originally was during Truman's administration after FDR had been elected 4 times. And, well, you know, FDR did many good things, but he had a lot of enemies. And Truman had similar enemies. And I think that was put in probably partly a little bit vindictive. Now, I was 6 or 7 years old at the time, so I don't really know. But
well, I do remember that, as a matter of fact. And the thing I remember is that it didn't apply to Truman. It was only the next president after him.
That's true.
So that would have been Eisenhower, I suppose, was the first president to be restricted to 2 terms.
Now, didn't George Washington did kind of a self-imposed
That's true.
term limit?
Right. He
He
did not.
Set the
refused-
precedent.
Okay.
He
Of
he
2 times.
wouldn't run. They wanted him to run.
Well, they wanted him to be king.
Right,
basically.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he, you know, depending upon your slant on history, is probably worthy of that for what he did for the United States and the Republic and the sacrifice that he made. But that's neither here nor there. But he had sort of set the precedent that the president was going to be a 2-term, and it wasn't until FDR, who ran successfully for 4 terms, that people started to look at that. So.
Oddly enough, the whole idea of term limits goes back to ancient Greece.
Right.
In the early
And
democracies, and it was a subject in among the founders of this country. But I think that there were sort of self-imposed term limits before. You know, a man left his farm in Pennsylvania to put in a stint as a state legislator. He had to get back to that farm sooner or later. You know, couldn't have the family running without him and all. But the other thing that I'd like to maybe talk a little bit more about gerrymandering, because I don't think that we would have all of these very, very safe districts without gerrymandering.
Right.
And it is such a difficult thing to get a handle on, because whoever is in power decides whether or not, you know, how we're going to be, how the redistricting is going to take place. And that, so that the party in power, in this, every time, in Ohio, in my experience, every time there's been a change in the majority in the legislature, the other side wants to end gerrymandering, or have some kind of a plan for redistricting along.
Well, if your guy's in there, it's a good thing, term limits. If your guy isn't in there, then it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
The other component in all of this is that, in going back to gerrymandering, it's been a useful tool in getting minority candidates elected by redistricting areas where there will be a majority of minority voters. Without that, there would be no minority voters. If you had a pure, objective, or like one guy we discussed this in our Sunday school class one Sunday, and one guy says, "Give me a ruler and a pencil, and I'll show you how to redistrict." By just drawing squares in the state of Ohio. If you do that, every district is going to have a majority of white people, and there would be no minorities in the legislature.
Not particularly so.
Yeah, I disagree.
No, I don't think
Okay,
so.
well, okay, excuse me, I exaggerated. I don't
Okay.
mean to.
Leave some room for excellence among the candidates.
Yeah, but I will, well.
Or not.
I'll just throw this out on the table because it's a shocking piece of data that I saw in the Cuyahoga County election this year. There were 21 precincts that voted 100% for one candidate.
Are you kidding, really?
Yeah, yeah. And then there were at least 50 that were less than 5 for Romney. 5 votes for Romney. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of concentration of power. But so I will take back what I said about but it would be more difficult to elect minority candidates if we did a totally objective type of redistricting.
Well, redistricting, other than the way it's been done in Ohio just recently, would be a very difficult task. Redistricting the way it's done now, I mean, the results of what's done now really lends itself to extreme polarity in the candidates. If you don't have a somewhat diversified electorate, and it's been gerrymandered into the to a conservative or liberal one, only the most conservative or most liberal candidates are going to get elected from that district. So I can see that's the negative part. I can see the positive part as far as giving opportunity to minority candidates. But it would be a difficult task if you really think about how difficult is the task of redistricting if you're not looking for political advantage. Because we're here in Wadsworth. If you go up to Valley City, which is in Medina County, it's like a whole different community. It's a whole different economy. It's a whole different focus upon, it's more of a Cleveland, Cuyahoga County focus than it is a Medina, Summit County focus. I mean, it would be difficult. Where do you draw that line?
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Bryan, you're involved in Medina County politics, and I know that there was a brief period of time that I did some work with Medina County, and one of the things that I noticed, along with Jerry's thinking, there's a huge difference between Wadsworth, Medina, and Brunswick.
Huge.
You've found
Sure.
that too.
Definitely. Brunswick has taken advantage of the folks that have been migrating from Cleveland. They've been moving down. They like the school systems. They have a different mindset. They're of a little different political persuasion. But I think as you see, getting back to the gerrymandering, it's an imperfect system, but it's one that creates that tension that sometimes a democracy or a republic needs. That's one of the reasons why I really wasn't in favor with the issue, I think it was issue 2, where they were going to set up a panel of nonpartisan individuals selected by judges to redistrict. I struggle with that because the way our system of government has been set up is to represent the voter. And when you get back to a fairly homogeneous community like Wadsworth, and Medina County is fairly homogeneous when you look at the demographics, it would be quite a task to balance out the vote. When you look at some of the purposes of redistricting is to balance
Patty,
out.
you and I could be our own district in Wadsworth.
We could,
probably
yes.
would be. Yeah, we probably would be. But so it's not perfect. There are problems with it, but I think it's probably one of the better systems that we have. And quite honestly, in politics, to the victor go the spoils. And that's one of the reasons why we have 2 political parties. And it's been done that way, whether we like it or not. And it could be tweaked here and there, but that's the system that we have to deal with. And you do your best to rally the troops, and that's what elections are all about. Getting your people to the polls. So.
But gerrymandering in the state of Ohio, and I understand all the concerns with the past issue. That may not have been the best solution, but I think that something needs to be done. And I'm not blaming Republicans and saying Democrats have done the same thing. But if you look at the present state of Ohio, Ohio voted for Obama. They voted for Sherrod Brown in the statewide elections. But because of the way the districts were drawn, when you got down to district voting, everything went to the Republicans. That really doesn't seem to gel. So it's when you get to the point that the districts are drawn so as to get a certain political outcome, which is what has been done by both parties, that's where you have a problem. And there needs to be something done, I think, at the state level to handle the way that we, the gerrymandering doesn't get out of control. I mean, if we look at our congressional district, that is a really interesting congressional district.
How many have they split Summit County into?
3 at least. But
7.
what parameters would you use, Patty? Other than how many registered in a particular party, it seems that's the parameters that are being used to draw the lines. What parameters would you use to draw a district?
To draw a district?
Yeah, you've got county borders, but
Proximity.
but I don't know. But
I would think proximity would be the first parameter that you'd
Okay.
have,
What
so
would
that you
some
don't
of those
have
be?
5 counties drawing into one particular district.
Okay.
That could be one. Population would
Okay.
also have to be considered, so that you don't have one district that's really small and one district that's really large. Those would just be your basics right there. To say that anybody would draw them without considering the political outcome is probably pie in the sky.
I'm sure it is.
But I think something needs to be done, or have some kind of limits, so we don't go out of control with the gerrymandering. And very honestly, if Democrats come into power in the state,
They're gonna do it.
They're going to do the same thing, and we'll be reversed in our discussion.
Well, I
So-
don't know if we'd be reversed, because if you take a look at Stark County, and you made the observation, why would a county be split into so many parts? Well,
Right.
if you take northern Stark County, they're more Summit County oriented. You take the southern part of Stark County, they may be oriented to Holmes or Tuscarawas County, because they've got different socioeconomic factors. They work at different professions and work and so forth.
Yeah.
So the person from northern Stark County, or the community in northern Stark County, is probably a lot different than the one down as you head down 77 and head for Dover, New Philly, and those areas. So,
See,
I
I
can
think-
see the contiguous county thing, but
See, I think that's just the point, though, is that when you do it that way, you are setting up a district that only has like-minded people in it, and you don't have that diversity for the election and for the choice for the voter as the difference.
And you would be in favor of the diversity. There's no,
Yeah.
I'm sitting here trying to imagine an advantage to having a homogeneous district. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a district with a lot of diversity in it.
Right, I agree with that. I think you should have diversity.
We
in
have
it.
homogeneous districts now, to some extent, the way it's set up.
Yes, some of them are. I don't,
It may be inevitable because of what the population is, but
Yeah.
I know issue 2 this time, I looked at it very carefully. At first I thought, well, at least it's a step in the right
Yeah.
direction. And then after I looked at it for a while and listened to some other people argue the other way, I decided, no, this is not a step in the right direction. I don't recall how many times there's actually been a ballot issue in Ohio concerning redistricting, but I do remember one from about 10 years ago, maybe more. I get older, the time flies fast. But the fact is that each time they've been on, somebody's still getting an advantage, or
That's true.
the opportunity for mischief is built into the system, and that's always been troublesome to me. Yeah, I don't know how you would do. I've thought about it if I were the districting czar. The first thing you think about is just take a grid and place it over the state, and then start looking at populations. Well, there's not much here. We'll spread that one out. Well, then you spread it into somebody else. It's a very complicated thing.
Yeah.
But getting back to our topic of term limits, which I don't think this is too far.
No, I
far
think it's
afield
related.
because they're married very definitely. But how much trouble is it to our democracy to have people gain power because of seniority in the state legislature? Is that really a troublesome thing? I mentioned Wayne Hayes a while ago, and the only negative I remember about him is he hired a very attractive secretary that didn't know how to type. You remember that story?
Yes.
I don't remember her name. But
Is it Fawn, somebody the other?
Yes, what?
Fawn,
No, that was-
somebody? Was that somebody else?
Yeah, that was somebody else, yeah.
I guess so. And Wilbur
Bambi.
Mills and Fanny Fox. But I don't know how much difficulty. Jerry mentioned Richard Byrd, the senator from West Virginia, and other than the fact that he had managed to name a whole lot of things after himself, or somebody did, in West Virginia, he attracted a tremendous amount of government spending to the state of West Virginia, big CIA headquarters and so forth. I don't know how harmful that is. Going back to this ideal of a citizen legislature, people changing, seats every 2 years.
One of the things that I think has happened over the years is government has grown to the point where I don't believe the founding fathers really understood how large government would be, and it takes a full time. And if you go back at the very inception, these individuals came for 2 or 3 months. They undertook the business of the of the United States, and then they went back and they worked their farms and all that stuff. Now it's almost a 24/7
right,
job.
and the size of government sounds like a good topic for another discussion.
That's exactly right, yeah.
This one is over, and I want to thank the panel very much, and I want to thank the audience for joining us for this week's discussion. Our goal is to show that reasonable people can have a reasonable discussion about potentially contentious topics. We hope that you found this program to be thought-provoking and will join us for future left and right discussions. To learn more about left and right, please visit our temporary website, rightandleft.org, rightandleft.org.
Got it right.
Or to become a volunteer or to make a monetary contribution to this nonprofit corporation, please contact me, John Grom, at 330-336-2213. And I'd like to leave you with this quote from Margaret Mead. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." We're done.